Hey there everybody, welcome back to Point Zero Games. I'm Patrick, this is Josh, and he will be going over his...
I am currently running a Bant deck. This is my standard deck that I'm running for FNMs and any other tournaments. It's kind of a mid-range tempo style deck. It doesn't really fit either of those archetypes perfectly, but it plays within both of them.
Sounds good. Well, let's dive right into it, take a look at what it makes up this thing, shall we?
Sure. So we're going to start with creature base. We've got two Elvish Mystics, basic mana dork, turn one play, and I'll go over why there's only two rather than a full play set of these things in a moment. Next we move over, we've got Sylvan Caryatids. We've got a full play set of these. It's a great mana dork for mana fixing, hex-proof, blocks out early defenders. Next we've got a play set of Fleecemane Lions. This is going to be a 2-drop Celestia-styled 3/3. It can swing hard, monstresses by turn 5, gets hexproof and indestructible, makes that really strong for overall aggro and blocking. Next we've got Corsair Crewfix. This is going to be a 3-drop 2/4. It's basically there for deck thinning, some life gain, as well as just being able to ramp through some mana if we need to. I'll give a reason why I'm only got 2 of these rather than 4 also. Next we've got Pelucranos the World Eater. This is a 4-drop 5/5, big fat stompy dude, comes in, swings face. Monstrosity trigger allows us to have a little bit of removal against anything small that may be blocking any of our threats. Next we've got Whisperwood Elemental. This is going to be a 5-drop 4/4. This is a new one out of Fate Reforged, and the main reason that I've got it in the deck here, 2 reasons. One, at the beginning of my end step, I can manifest the top card of my library, so again, it's more deck thinning, but it's also giving me 2/2s on the board, so a little bit of additional presence, and if it's a creature, Mundo does smash like a boss. And also, it allows me to morph a creature over if I end up getting one through the manifest. The second reason is for the matchup against any form of control with a sweeper. It gives me the ability to refresh my board after they end up sweeping with either a Crux or an End Hostilities. Next, we've got our Torrent Elemental. That's another 5-drop. It's a 3/5 flyer. This is another new one out of Fate Reforged. The cool thing about this one is it lets me get damage through. I originally had Prog Sphinx in that place, but the difference between Prog Sphinx and this, Prog Sphinx does come with its own form of protection, and this does too, because if it gets exiled, you can pay 5, bring it back onto the battlefield tapped. But this, once he's on the board and he gets to swing, everything else is getting through, so it's going to be a big hit whenever you end up doing that. And then we have a 1-of on the Segu Mauler. He's a 6-drop 6/6 trample hexproof, really fat stompy dude. The big reason that I like him in the deck as a 1-of is when I do end up getting him, I can cast him out at 3 for a 2/2 and then use him as a morpher. But I can also use the next creature, which is Genesis Hydra, to try and get him out. So I've got a 3-of on Genesis Hydra. This is a really strong card to play against control. It's also just a really strong card, period, in terms of deck thinning again. So there's a lot of ways to deck thin, and this is one of the biggest primary ways. Being able to get out any other permanent, which most of our cards are going to be anywhere between the 1 to 3 range for a creature, as well as our enchantments are going to be 3-drops. We can put him out for 5 at a cost of 5, turn him into a 3/3, dig 3 cards, find what we need, put it on the board, and start really ramping up our overall game. So really fantastic card to have in the deck. I've been really surprised with him. Next, we've got Planeswalker. We've got 2-of on Kiora. I feel like 3-of would be too greedy with this. We're going to -1 this more than anything else, just so that way we can get the additional card draw and the additional land play. Especially with Corsair being on the board, makes it to where we can even deck thin further. We can cycle about 5 cards if the Corsair is on play. But if we do have somebody that we're playing against that has big stompy things, Siege Rhino, then we can go ahead and +1, and that ends up preventing a little bit of damage for us.
Very subtle, Josh.
The biggest thing for that one, though, is Stormbreath Dragon, because in the main deck, there are very few ways to handle a Stormbreath Dragon, and so that does give us something to help prevent damage from that guy. Next, we've got 2 of on Monastery Siege. This is another new card from Fate Reforged. I've been really impressed with this, and not because of the dragon side. When I've been calling this, I've actually been calling con side more often than not. The card draw is really strong because you end up drawing 2 cards on your draw step, then you discard a card. So it helps get dead cards out of hand, keeps healthy cards in your hand. But if you do end up playing against somebody that's just huge on removal, like a control deck, calling dragons on this doesn't hurt you at all. Being able to stop downfalls and everything else until about turn 5 is really, really strong. And even then, it's self-protection. Erase costs 3. It's just a really strong card to have in the deck. And as a 2 of, I think it's a really good spot. Next, we've got 4 of on Vanishing Light, a full play set. It's not an instant. It's, not going to fill that spot. Really, we have this as a way to try and have response to Planeswalkers, since there's not a lot of other ways to do that in the deck. It's a really great response to Planeswalkers, but also, I've had matches where Goblin Rabble Masters hit the board, and this thing ended up saving my life. So, really great card to have in here. Next, we've got 1 of on Stubborn Denial. This card is really about either the turn 2 play, where they don't have mana and you can stop some of their mana ramp early, or once you end up getting a Monstrous Fleece Mane, a Pelucranos, a Whisperwood on the board, this gives you the ability to just flat out 1-drop counter a spell. This stops Crux of Fates. If somebody doesn't have mana open, this stops End Hostilities. It's just that one tiny little bit of extra control available to you. Next, we've got Valorous Stance. We've run that at a 2 of. The Indestructible on it is really nice. Really, we're using it just solely for removal. It's good against the Green matchup, good against the Abzan matchup. Next, we've got Reality Shift. I've been told a million times not to run this card. I don't agree. It is a 2 of in the deck. This is a uncommon out of Fate Reforged. You exile a target creature, and then that controller manifests the top card of their library. So, yes, you could give them a 2/2 that could be a Siege Rhino, and then they flip it over and have a 4/5. The other side of that is you could exile a creature, and they could end up putting a land out on the board, and then you've got a 2/2 that's easy to respond to. Really, the biggest part is about the exile. Being able to exile out a Siege Rhino so it can't be whipped back in is really, really strong for this. And then we've got the land base and the sideboard. Land base, I'm running 3 Windswept Heaths, 3 Flooded Strands, total of 6 fetch lands. I'm not running play sets of each. I don't have a 4th Flooded Strand or a 4th Windswept, but with the way this is played, I don't really feel like I need them, in all honesty, and I'll explain that in a little bit. We've got 3 Temple of Plenties. Scrylands, helps me get to the draw that I want. We also have 2 Tranquil Coves and 2 Thornwood Falls. These are going to be the life tap lands from the Konzatar Kier set. It helps give this that little extra bit of sustain, and also if I don't have an Elvish Mystic in hand, but I have one of these and I can play a basic land or a fetch on the next turn, I might as well just go ahead and do this, get myself up to 21 life, and have the color fixing that I need available. And then we also run 5 basic forests, 4 basic plains, and 2 basic islands. We don't need more than 2 islands. We rarely ever have a problem hitting any of our blue because there's not that much of it. But the force and the plains are very, very specific and very necessary in the deck. For the sideboard, we've got 1 Dissolve, we've got 2 Disdainful Strokes, and 2 Negates for our counter spells. We are really siding these in, again, for Planeswalkers, also for just anything that costs over 4. Really, they work fantastic to stop somebody's endgame. We've got a 2 of on Mistcutter Hydra. This is pretty much solely for the control matchup. Then we've also got a 2 of on End Hostilities, which I'll explain that once we get to the end of this, because that one's a bit of a lengthy explanation. 2 Plummets to take care of any form of Wingmate Rocks and or Stormbreath Dragons that we have. 1 of on Erase, that helps to get out Coursers early if we need it. It also helps to get out Whip of Erebos, any type of enchantment that people want to be playing. Also Gods. Gods are a thing. Pharika happens. Last, we've got a 1 of on Reality Shift to bring that in if we're focused on a green deck, and we've got Honor's Reward, which is a really weird fringe card that I like playing. You gain 4 life and bolster 2, so I can turn, if I've only got 1 creature on the board and I'm playing against control, I can use this to gain a little bit of sustain and also make my dudes a little bit fatter. Now the End Hostilities, getting back to that, the reason that I'm running this, I understand that I've got a ton of creatures, I'll end up board wiping myself, but the thing is, if I'm going against a Team Year matchup, an Abzan matchup, any form of token matchup, this is a really strong card for me. I don't care if I wipe my own board because I have Whisperwood. I'll repopulate my board if I need to. But even bigger than that is the fact that if I'm playing against any of those decks and they have creatures on the board and I have creatures on the board, most likely there's a chance that their creature is going to outdo me. And so I have to keep that at a level playing field. And so that really is a tempo card in all senses of the word. So yeah, that's the entirety of the deck overall.
Well, that sounds very good, Josh. But what do you think this deck's main strengths, main weaknesses are?
The main strength that I've found with the deck is it has this really weird synergy. Like I said, it's kind of got a bit of a tempo base. And it plays that way, especially when you look at the amount of deck thinning that I'm doing. It allows me to get to the cards that I want when I want them. But more importantly than that, I have a really solid mana curve up and down. My 3 spot is a little awkward because there's really only one creature and it's at a 2 of. But I have at least 6 enchantments that I'm playing in that 3 of spot as well. And those Banishing Lights will actually get me closer to what I need because I don't have to worry about if the Goblin Rabblemaster is swinging at me. I don't have to worry about if Xenagos is going to pop out tokens or anything like that. As far as weaknesses, anything that runs really fast, like a red deck, a red-white deck, anything that is a weenie-styled aggro deck can be really difficult. Just because if I'm not hitting a Caryatid, a Courser, and a Polukranos, it starts causing problems. And then if I start not hitting my mana, which I should, but if, God forbid, I don't, I start seeing problems there also. The biggest weakness that I've seen is, honestly, against big stompy decks. And a lot of that, I think, is just because I haven't played against many of them. So I have a couple of things that I need to learn how to do on that. But overall, those would, I think, be the strengths and weaknesses. The biggest strength, I can play against blue-black control, and I can actually give them a run for their money, which is really hilarious.
Have you played against blue-black control yet?
I have. I've played against an Esper control so far. And I ended up winning that match. I got 2 out of 3 on that one. The first round was really strong, but was really strong for me. But I ended up falling back. I made a couple of bad plays. Going into the second and third matches, once I sided in, it started making things much easier when I had my counter spells available to me.
Speaking of side-ins, what kind of side-ins would you throw for this, depending on the matchup? What do you think the synergies are? And how does the deck flow, depending on what you've sided in and who you're going up against?
Well, I mean, overall deck flow, I mean, if I get the Mystic, it's cool. If I don't get the Mystic, it's no big deal. As long as I've got a Caryatid in hand when I start, it's gonna be very easy for me to get to the things that I want. Funny enough, though, the deck flow works really well because I always end up hitting the creatures that I want in whatever situation I'm playing. If I want Polukranos, I'll get Polukranos on the board. If I want Whisperwood, I'll get Whisperwood on the board. And a lot of that is because of the amount of deck thinning that I've added to the deck, just so I can get to the cards that I want. Get lands out of the way, get a bunch of useless cards for the matchup out of the way. I cannot count how many times I've been happy that I've got a Whisperwood on the board. I end up throwing out a manifested card, and it's a Valorous Stance, which isn't going to do me much good against a weenie deck that's running 1/1s and 2/2s. So that's been a really cool synergy that I wasn't expecting out of the deck, and then once I started playing it, it actually happened. As far as any side-ins that I would do, the Dissolve, the Disdainful Stroke, and the Negate, really those are only going to come in against control matchups. The Negate will come in against anybody that's playing any type of heavy enchantment or heavy Planeswalkers decks. Any type of Super Friends at all. Disdainful Stroke is really going to be Elspeth, Ugin, guys like that are just huge. Siege Rhino, Wingmate Rocks, and those guys that are just massive. Being able to play that out against them is actually really strong for me. Mistcutter Hydra, again, is just blue-black control. That's really it. Anybody that's running just pure control, it's a fantastic card. I played a Simic Devotion deck that had a couple of counters, and he came in real handy. In hostilities, anything with big stompy dudes. That's the big thing. Any big stompy, any weedy aggro. Plummet, if they've got any type of flyers, it's a fat wing condition.
Siege Rhino, or not Siege Rhino, but Storm Breath.
Storm Breath is the huge one. Since I'm playing in white and I do not have black removal available, that is a massive portion.
Though Kolaghan is seeing play.
Kolaghan is seeing play in a couple of decks, and I do know that there's a couple of decks that are still French playing Wingmate Rock, and there's another flyer that I can't think of off the top of my head, but they are playing some of those, and Plummet just gives me that extra capability. But if I'm going against the green-red, I know they've got Storm Breath, I will throw Plummet in immediately.
And let's face it, no one ever expects the Plummet.
Right, exactly. And that's also why I've got the Reality Shift in the sideboard. I can side that in against that. Erase, like I said, it's good for Gods. Farika's seeing a ton of play in Abzan. Being able to even just take out a Hammer Hand if I need to. You know, some random dumb thing. Doomwake Giant is massive, yes. Eidolon of Blossoms, Courser of Crewfix, Master of Feast, if there's some crazy man that's playing that type of thing. Stop giggling. Honor's Reward is a really weird card because there's a lot of occasions I don't side it in. It's really more just if I feel like I'm getting outpaced in a match, I throw in the Honor's Reward as a way to get a bigger creature, even if it hits carry added. It turns it into a 2/5. It can block really well and it can take something out. But also just the 4 life that I gain off of that, plus I've got 4 life lands, plus I've got Courser Crewfix in here. It gives me a lot of extra sustain if I end up needing it. It's really there for the burn matchup, but there's so few burn decks that are really showing up right now that it's kind of a fringe thing, and I may end up playing around with that and seeing if I can find other things to side in, but not a big deal.
Good to hear. So let's move into play style, actually. What would be the optimal 7 cards off the draw?
Optimal 7, I want to see 3 lands whenever I open up. I want at least one of them to be a fetch. If I can have 2 as a fetch, that's actually really good because, again, I get to that early deck thinning that I want. If I can get a Temple of Plenty off the top, that's cool too. Elvish Mystic, 50-50 shot that I want that in the hand. The definite 7 that I would like to see, I want to see at least 3 lands, 2 of which are fetches. I want to see Sylvan Caryatid, Fleecemane Lion, Pelucranos, and Whisperwood. So if I had to choose between all 4 of those being in there, those would be the 4 that I would want. I actually wouldn't want the Courser in my hand immediately. I would like to try and just Genesis Hydra in, grab Courser, and then again, just more deck thinning. So
the Courser would slow you down in that opening hand, getting Fleecemane to Monstrous.
It wouldn't necessarily slow me down, but it doesn't get me to the deck thinning tempo that I want. This deck really feels to me like it's very much about getting the population up as fast as possible, and it gets it to there by deck thinning through manifests and by searching for the cards with Genesis Hydra and by getting the lands out of the way with the fetches and by drawing extra cards off of Monastery Siege and by just so many little intricate things that give me that extra card advantage.
By the way, I've been meaning to ask, how is the synergy between Monastery Siege and Kiora?
The synergy between Monastery Siege and Kiora is really interesting. Given that I'm drawing 2 cards and the opponent doesn't have to see the second card, it makes it really interesting whenever I draw because then I can discard one of those and then they'll find out what it is, but it could be the one that they already saw and they don't know what I've actually got. Plus, it does get me to the lands quicker, which deck thins quicker. There's just this really crazy amount of synergy that ends up having with Kiora, surprisingly enough. But beyond that, being able to go top of the turn, draw a card, draw an extra card, discard a card, -1 Kiora, draw a card, and then bam, 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 vomit a hand is really, really fun.
I can imagine. Alrighty, so if you had to mull first turn, what are your optimal 6 or even 5?
If I had to mull down to 6 or 5, what I want to see on the next one, I'd like to see an Elvish Mystic rather than the Caryatid. I wouldn't mind seeing the Caryatid still, as long as I've got 1 mana dork in my hand. I'd want to go down to 2 lands. I would like one of them to be a fetch and one of them to potentially be my scry or life land. And then I would also like to see Fleecemane. I would like to see Courser at that point. Because if I'm having to toss my hand, then I need to start getting lands on the board as fast as possible to catch up to the card advantage that my opponent may have. And then last but not least, this sounds weird, I want to see that 1 Segu Mauler. Because he is a 3-drop 2/2 that I can flip for 5. So it gets early board presence, and that's a huge part of this deck whenever you have to mull down. If you don't have the board presence, it hurts. Monastery Siege doesn't hurt that much either. So if I had to go optimal 6, I would say I would go 1 fetch, 1 tap, Elvish Mystic, Fleecemane, Monastery Siege, and Segu Mauler. Is that 6? That was 6. I
Yes.
think 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. If I had to go down to 5, I want to see 2 lands, 1 fetch, 1 tap, Elvish Mystic, Courser, and Monastery Siege. Just because, again, it gets down to being about that card draw and getting things out as fast as possible.
Also nice and safe. Alrighty, so, I mean, that's all kinds of good. How's the play history so far? What have we gone against? We've gone to 1 F&M. How did you come out?
I ended up top 8 for the F&M.
Well done.
I played against, I did 5 different decks that I played against at F&M. I played against a Naya token deck, 2 Naya token decks, one of which was Josh Watts, who's former state champ. And that was, him and I have always had very one-sided matches where he's just obliterated me, and this one was not one-sided at all. He sweated bullets at least 1 or 2 times, and I was actually really happy about that I was able to be competitive against him like that. Played against the Simic Devotion deck. That one didn't go well, but that was for other reasons rather than just necessarily the deck itself. I also played against an Esper control deck, and that one, the first match was a little difficult, but once I got to 2 and 3, that started to end up becoming much easier because once I got the counters in, that started making, just giving me a little bit of extra ease on my overall card draws. I also played against a red-white heroic deck, and that's where I ended up learning that the early game in the deck can be a little fidgety, but once you get the Fleece main on board, it starts stabilizing pretty well. I've also played it against, let me see, I had the 2 Naya decks, I had the Simic Devotion, I had the red-white heroic, and the Esper on that day. I've also played against a Rakdos mid-range deck that Patrick here is playing, and we had some fairly evened out matches on that one. You'll see that deck in a separate video that we'll link in the bottom description, and that thing is really cool, and it's really interesting to play against that deck because I have to really think about what I want to side in on against that matchup. And then I've also played against, what else did I play against? I don't even remember. I know those are the ones that I've played against, and they were all really fantastic. Oh, Rakdos low drop aggro, a new cat that has been coming up to Magic. I played against his deck. It was basically Shadow Spear, Strike Leaders, things like that. Played really fun. I really enjoyed it. So
No man cows?
Huh?
No man cows?
No, I haven't played it against any Minotaurs yet. I would like to get some Minotaur games in, but overall, I haven't gotten to play this against a Nabzan deck, and that's the thing that I'm really wanting to get to, is playing this against a Nabzan deck and seeing how that ends up feeling. So right now, the play history is really good. I am majority wins with it, so that's really strong. I'd say it's 2, 3, 3, 3, 2, 2, so probably about a 68 to 70% win rate on the deck.
Not bad at all.
But like I said, once I get against the Abzan decks, I think I'll be able to find out a little bit more about how the deck can do. And there's a couple of things that I still want to test with and move around. Take the Mystics out, put in a couple of Coursers, see how that goes, see what a couple more fetches may play like, try some different sideboard options and see where all that goes. But right now, this is a really strong, comfortable starting place for me to start with this deck, and it definitely plays well.
That sounds good, brother. I'm sure we'll get a chance to test this against Abzan here pretty soon. But from me and Mr. Josh Williams here at Point Zero Games, this is Bant Midrange Tempo, and we hope you enjoy.
Thank you.